On July 30th, 1975, one of the most powerful men in America vanished without a trace. Jimmy Hoffa, the fiery labor leader who had once commanded an army of nearly 2 million union workers, walked out of a Detroit area restaurant parking lot and was never seen again. But Hoffa wasn't just a man. To some, he was a working-class hero, a voice for truck drivers and laborers who had long been overlooked. To others, he was a dangerous man with dangerous friends, deeply entangled with the mob. And to the FBI, he was a thorn in their side, someone who knew far too much about corruption, organized crime, and backroom deals. The story of Jimmy Hoffa isn't just about a disappearance. It's about power, betrayal, and the dangerous line between loyalty and silence. And nearly 50 years later, his fate remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. James Riddle Hoffa was not born into privilege. He was born in 1913 in Brazil, Indiana, to a poor coal mining family. By the time he was a teenager, his father had died, and Hoffa dropped out of school to support his family. He started working on the loading docks, hard, backbreaking labor that paid very little. It was here, in the world of exhausted workers and brutal bosses, that Hoffa found his calling. He wasn't the strongest man, but he was fearless. Hoffa had a gift for organizing, rallying workers together, and speaking with fire in his voice. By his early 20s, he was a rising star in the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the largest labor union in America. Hoffa's union wasn't just about wages and hours, it was about respect. He fought for the underdog, for the working man who was constantly crushed by big corporations. But his meteoric rise came with shadows. To win battles, Hoffa needed allies. And in mid-century America, the most powerful allies weren't always politicians. They were mobsters. In post-war America, organized crime had its hands in everything: casinos, construction, politics, and, of course, labor unions. Hoffa knew that, if he wanted power, he needed the mob. The Teamsters controlled billions of dollars in pension funds. Money that mobsters desperately wanted access to. In exchange, they offered Hoffa muscle, protection, and influence. It was a marriage of convenience, but also one of danger. By the 1950s, Hoffa was untouchable. His voice carried weight not just in the boardroom, but in the White House. Presidents feared him. Workers adored him. And the mob tolerated him as long as their pockets stayed lined. But power attracts enemies. And Hoffa's biggest enemy was a young, ambitious attorney named Robert F. Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy, serving as chief counsel to the Senate Labor Rackets Committee in the late 1950s, made it his mission to take down Hoffa. To Kennedy, Hoffa represented corruption, organized crime, and the exploitation of unions. The hearings became legendary. Kennedy grilled Hoffa in front of millions of Americans, trying to expose his mob ties. But Hoffa was no easy target. He gave as good as he got, snarling back at Kennedy with a mix of charm and menace. The feud was personal, and it grew even fiercer when John F. Kennedy became president and appointed his brother as Attorney General. The Justice Department created a Get Hoffa squad dedicated solely to his downfall. And they succeeded, at least for a time. In 1967, Hoffa was convicted of jury tampering, fraud, and bribery. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison. But even behind bars, Hoffa's influence never waned. The Teamsters still saw him as their true leader, and he still dreamed of one thing: getting his power back. In 1971, President Richard Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence, allowing him to walk free after just 5 years. But there was a catch. Nixon barred him from engaging in union activities until 1980. Hoffa, of course, had no intention of waiting. He wanted his throne back. The problem? His successor, Frank Fitzsimmons, had grown comfortable in the top spot, and the mob liked Fitzsimmons. Unlike Hoffa, Fitzsimmons didn't challenge their control. He gave them what they wanted without a fight. Hoffa, on the other hand, was dangerous. He knew too much. He had dirt on mob bosses across the country, from Detroit to Chicago to New York. If he regained power, he might cut them out or worse, expose them. And so, in the summer of 1975, Hoffa began plotting his return. He scheduled meetings with key figures in Detroit's mob world. He wanted their support or at least their neutrality in his comeback. But Hoffa underestimated how badly the mob wanted him gone. July 30th, 1975 was an ordinary summer day in Detroit. Hoffa left his home around 1 p.m., wearing a short-sleeved shirt and carrying a small envelope. He told his wife he was going to meet two men at the Machu's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, a well-known mob hangout. The men were Anthony "Tony Jack" Giacalone, a Detroit mobster, and Anthony "Tony Pro" Provenzano, a New Jersey mob boss. Both had reasons to dislike Hoffa. Both had the means to make him disappear. Hoffa arrived at the restaurant parking lot around 2 p.m. Witnesses saw him pacing outside, growing agitated. By 2:45 p.m. he was still waiting. Then nothing. His car, a maroon Pontiac, was later found in the parking lot. His keys, wallet, and belongings were inside. But Hoffa himself had vanished into thin air. The FBI launched one of the largest investigations in its history. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses, raided mob hangouts, and searched fields, homes, and warehouses. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Hoffa had been driven away in a car and executed. Others whispered he'd been buried under the freshly built Giants Stadium in New Jersey. There were stories of his body being dumped in the Great Lakes, crushed in a car, or even dissolved in acid. But the truth never surfaced. The men Hoffa was supposed to meet, Tony Jack and Tony Pro, denied any involvement. The mob stayed silent. The FBI had plenty of theories, but no body, no crime scene, and no concrete evidence. Over the years, countless theories emerged. The mafia hit. The most widely accepted theory is that the mob killed Hoffa to prevent his return to power. The hit was likely approved by high-ranking bosses, and Hoffa's body was disposed of in a way that made it impossible to find. The Teamster betrayal. Some believe Hoffa's own union brothers betrayed him. Fitzsimmons and his allies stood to gain the most from Hoffa's disappearance. Government involvement. A more fringe theory suggests the government looked the other way, or even played a role because Hoffa had too much information about corruption and backroom deals. But without a body, every theory is speculation. In 1982, Jimmy Hoffa was declared legally dead. His family never got closure. His enemies never faced justice. And his story became legend. Jimmy Hoffa's name is now synonymous with mystery. His disappearance has been referenced in movies, books, and even jokes. But behind the myth lies a man who rose from nothing, fought for the working class, and ultimately paid the price for flying too close to power. Nearly half a century later, the FBI claims it still receives tips about Hoffa's disappearance. In fact, as recently as 2021, they dug up land in New Jersey after a new lead suggested his body might be buried near a landfill. Once again, nothing was found. But what if someone out there knows the truth? What if Hoffa's body has been hiding in plain sight for decades, in a place no one has ever thought to look? Tell me what you think in the comment section below. And hit the subscribe button to help us bring more true crime stories that will blow your mind.